Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. You see, we can get some good court wins every now and then, even in this country. ICE can get good court wins even after everything happens, even after all the calling them Nazis and comparing them to Stalin's Gestapo or, calling them communist, fascist, like all kinds of name calling. We can still get some really good wins. So, today, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals made a really critical decision, overturning a lower court that placed restrictions over ICE agents and what they could do in the face of protest in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and really everywhere else. But specifically, this case has to do with Minneapolis because it was filed by the Democrats in Minneapolis, attempting to obstruct what ICE was able to do, but now it has been overturned after a lower court judge made an erroneous, disgusting decision restricting what federal law enforcement agents could do to protect themselves. We're going to be talking a lot about that. And then I'll touch on this drama, right? Early today, President Trump announced that he had a conversation with Tim Walz. Tampan Tim. Hello, Tampan. How are you? And a conversation with Jacob Frey, the mayor of Minneapolis, and some conflicting messages came out. There were rumors, reports that Greg Bavino, the commander at large of Border Patrol, was relieved of his duties, demoted. We'll look at the story and see if there's truthfulness to it, and if there is, we'll talk about that. But let me just first of all get into this, right? So, a few weeks ago, a group of radical lunatics came together and filed a lawsuit in the U.S. District Court for the District of Minnesota, challenging ICE agents' authority and their enforcement activity under Operation Metro Surge, which is what we're seeing right now. Metro Surge is ongoing, and they have collected over 10,000 illegals in the last few months. I'd say 90 days. So these protesters, these Democrats, these lunatics filed the lawsuit attacking law enforcement. It was filed against every official within the DHS, including Kristi Noem, Todd Lines of ICE, Marcus Charles, the guy leading enforcement and removal operations, just about every official in the Trump government dealing with deportations. They got served with this lawsuit. And the district court, the lower court judge, obviously a crook appointed by Democrats, ruled actually restricting ICE and their ability to, protect themselves or deal with protesters. So they couldn't use pepper sprays or any other non-lethal munitions against quote-unquote peaceful protesters. The kind of peace where they wave machetes in your face, right? The kind of peace where guys show up in body armor looking like militias and they're armed. That kind of peace, right? The kind of peaceful protest where, only a few buildings get burned down. Sure. So the lower court judge agreed with these lunatics, but today that decision has been overturned by the Eighth Circuit after the Trump DHS appealed the decision. So here we go. I'm going to have to read some of this because it is important just to understand the technicalities here, because it matters, especially when we see ICE agents acting in self-defense. And some people say, that he discharged his gun by accident because he heard gun, but it doesn't matter. Point is, he had a reasonable suspicion that his life was in danger, and he acted based on the, information available to him at that time. But anyways, let's read this. The district court entered a preliminary injunction with respect to federal immigration enforcement operations in Minnesota. The injunction is unlikely to survive the government interlocutory appeal, so we stay it pending a final decision in this case. So the three judges, or I guess maybe just two, I'm sure there's a Biden or Obama judge disagreeing with this ruling, But the majority on this panel is saying we think it's unlikely that the government loses their appeal. So we think it's unlikely that the lower court's injunction survives. So we are blocking that lower court ruling until we make our final decision. And 6 individuals who have observed and protested Operation Metro Surge, the ongoing immigration enforcement effort in the Twin Cities, sued on behalf of all persons who do or will in the future record, observe, and or protest against it. The preliminary injunction covers all of them and limits what federal agents who take part in the operation or respond to the protest can do while carrying out their official duties. Included in the district court's order are prohibitions on retaliating against anyone engaged in peaceful or unobstructive protest activity, and stopping vehicles without reasonable, articulable suspicion that the occupants are forcibly obstructing or interfering with immigration enforcement activities. So it actually prevented ICE agents from stopping cars or going after, these trackers, these people in signal groups tracking their license plates around. For at least 2 reasons, the government has made a strong showing that its challenge to the injunction is likely to succeed on the merits. First, the grant of relief to such a broad, uncertified class, meaning it's not a true class action. Like if you're going to sue on behalf of people past, future, and present, you need a class certification in the legal system, and these people didn't have that. And then they're saying it is just a universal injunction by another name. So it goes back to the Supreme Court ruling where the Supreme Court said courts can't just be making, unilateral blockages of executive action by the president. And so this goes back to that. We assessed and viewed the same videos the district court did. So they watched ICE videos. What they show is observers and protesters engaging in a wide range of conduct, some of it peaceful, but much of it not. So this is a federal court, a panel, right? A court only lower than the Supreme Court, ruling, observing that much of what we're seeing at these protests is not peaceful. They're engaging in violent activities. They are intimidating, obstructing, interfering with federal law enforcement activities. They also show federal agents responding in various ways. Even the named plaintiffs' claims involve different conduct by different officers at different times in different places in response to different behavior. These differences mean there are no questions of law or fact common to the class, right? So if 6 people are suing, but they all have different experiences, they can't get the same result, right? If one man has 6 baby mamas, what is this analogy? One man has 6 baby mamas. They all take him to court. But it turns out he treats each of the kids of those baby mamas differently. Then that man must not be prosecuted, must not be held to the same level of child support, or declared a negligent parent, for how he treats one baby but not the other 5. So that's the point, right? You can't just make an injunction stopping every ICE agent from doing anything, anywhere, anytime, when these people are not even sharing a similar experience with these ICE agents. Second, in addition to being too broad, the injunction is too vague. Right. Directions not to retaliate against persons who are engaging in peaceful or unobstructive protest activity, or stop or detain drivers where there's no reasonable, articulable suspicion, or simply commands to obey the law, which are not specific enough. Yeah. Even the provision that singles out the use of pepper spray or similar non-lethal munitions and crowd dispersal tools requires federal agents to predict what the district court would consider peaceful and unobstructive protest activity. The videos underscore how difficult it would be for them to decide who has crossed the line. They show a fast-changing mix of peaceful and obstructive conduct, with many protesters getting in officers' faces and blocking their vehicles as they conduct their activities, only for some of them to then rejoin the crowd and intermix with those who were merely recording and observing the scene. Exactly, this is the whole point. A wrong call could end in contempt, yet there is little in the order that constrains the district's court's order to impose it. So the officer could get punished for, not following vague district court orders that prevent them from breathing at this point. And the appellate court is seeing right through that. Federal courts do not exercise general oversight of the executive branch, so they cite that law saying federal courts are supposed to check the power and authority of the executive branch. Not check like if you go, walk in the wrong neighborhood in Chicago or Memphis or some dangerous city run by adolescent black lunatics who weren't raised with fathers. Not like that checked, where you disrespected me. No, not that checked. When the Constitution delegates responsibilities to the various branches, the authorities they get that are enumerated are their mechanisms of checking the powers of the other branches. If Congress makes a law and the president signs it and the law restricts something the judiciary can do, that is technically a check. When federal courts receive lawsuits and rule against or for the president, they are checking. That's how it works. It doesn't mean they have to confront and have their eyes all over whatever the executive does, like supervising the president. That is not their job. Their job is to weigh the actions, specific actions, and see if they are consistent with law, statutes, or the Constitution. If they don't, then, that's when the courts can step in. And there are instances where we need the courts. Like, I'd like to know whether the Economic Emergency Powers Act actually does give the president the power to tariff, even though I would be pissed if the Supreme Court ruled against Trump, because I want them to rule the way I want, which is to give the president or recognize the president's broad power. But I do think it's important that they do their job, read the law, and see if the president is following it. And I think he is. But that's, we need to clear all the, uncertainties in the system. So that's how you create a more efficient system. But when you have judges constantly butting in, trying to micromanage the executive, overturn every action just to overturn the overturn later on, you create chaos and uncertainty. The judiciary should be predictable. The average lawyer or the average person should be able to decipher what the Supreme Court will rule, what any judge will rule on any given day. But right now what we see is almost like 90% of the times we get district courts that rule one way against the administration, the Trump administration, because they weren't doing this under Biden. And then we have appellate courts that may or may not uphold those rulings. It's 50-50. And then like 9 times out of 10, we go to the Supreme Court and Trump wins. And that's chaotic. It's like we could have skipped all the headaches and just gotten to that final conclusion. But it's like every judge wants to be a hero and stop Orange Man from doing his policies, enacting his political ambitions. It's crazy. So this is a great ruling. It finishes off, we accordingly grant the government's emergency motion for a stay pending appeal, deny the plaintiff's emergency motion to lift the administrative stay as moot, and grant their request for expedited merits briefings. And I think it was a unanimous decision, but one judge concurred, but, had to add in some extra information, which, that's common. They don't always agree. They'll vote with the majority, but, they'll disagree on some key points. Yeah, good on those judges, because this is an important decision. It recognizes that ICE, Border Patrol, and just every federal law enforcement agencies They should have a degree of broad authority to judge situations based on how they are, not how the left, portrays them. So it's a big win. Good win. Now, I do want to talk about what went on today because President Trump, very early in the morning, 9 a.m. my time, 11 a.m. Eastern, posted that he spoke with Tim Walz, and they appeared to have come to a common conclusion, which is we don't want to see more people hurt. So let's try to come up with a peaceful resolution. So I guess what happened is Tom Homan was deployed to Minneapolis. Homan is maybe already there, but for sure on his way to Minneapolis to meet with the officials on the ground to see what can happen with the enforcement operation with all these deportations, these protests, how the various parties can work together. President Trump then touted his success in other states and cities, Washington, D.C., Memphis, Tennessee, New Orleans, Louisiana, and every other place where ICE has been increasing its presence. And then President Trump also revealed that he spoke with Jacob Frey, the sissy mayor of Minneapolis, who has handed the city over to the Somalis to commit as much fraud and steal as much money as possible to build real estate in Mogadishu, Somalia, saying that lots of progress is being made. Tom Homan will be meeting with him tomorrow. So he's meeting with Tampon Tim and Jacob Fried Chicken. And then the story came out, which really devastated me, that Greg Bovino had been fired. Or, hold on, that's not the story. This is the conclusion of the story. But Nick Sorter, great friend of mine, who is following all of these things, I think he's still in Minneapolis, he posted that, where is this? Greg Bovino was relieved of his duty as Commander-at-Large of the U.S. Border Patrol. He exclusively learned. And Nick Sorter will have sources within Border Patrol at all levels. This guy's been in communications with Kristi Noem, with the Attorney General of the United States. So he's a true citizen journalist. Great guy. So when he posted this, I immediately believed it because Nick doesn't lie, especially about something as important as this. And so the speculation became, did Trump basically just make Bovino like the fall guy? Did the Trump administration decide Bovino and Kristi Noem, they want too many deportations? Tom Homan, who has been a proponent of the idea that we only need to deport the worst of the worst. That's Homan's entire, outlook on deportations. So the question was, did Bovino get demoted or something else to make way for Tom Homan to take over and lead a much more different operation in nature? Because Greg Bovino and Kristi Noem are proponents of the idea that we need to deport as many people as possible. Tom Homan would rather focus on the criminals, which is understandable, but, the lines are blurred. They're all criminals. That's at least what the stories have been saying. So Nick Sorter started talking about worst of the worst, like how that's going to be the new focus and how that essentially means amnesty for millions of illegals. And then he stood by his report saying until Border Patrol agents are back under the control of Greg Bovino, press releases are simply words, as the Trump administration began to put out conflicting reports saying actually Bovino has not been relieved of his duty, he's still with the administration, without confirming whether or not he would remain Commander-at-Large of Border Patrol. Nick Sorter also said Greg Bovino and his team were locked out of their social media accounts. And then he called out Border Patrol Commissioner Rodney Scott, asking, is there a reason you're attempting to push out the man who has been one of the largest proponents of Trump's mission of mass deportation? And then finally, he reported that President Trump has personally stepped in and saved Greg Bovino's role as Commander-at-Large of the U.S. Border Patrol. his sources tell him Kristi Noem fully backs this decision. And so whatever was happening behind the scenes was a quick developing story. And then he finished off with announcing that Homan is officially en route to be ICE's point man on the ground in Minnesota. So here's what I think actually happened, because I don't think Greg Bovino got fired, although, it did sound like it, and I would not have been surprised if the pressure from the outside world, the MAGA world, because everyone was pissed about this, if the pressure is what led, a change of mind. So here's what I think could be happening, right? Trump calls Tim Walz and these guys and says, hey, we'll work with you, right? We'll work with you, but we do need to do our jobs. We'll give you a little bit of a win, which is we'll withdraw some agents, because Jacob Frey wrote that he spoke with President Trump and he expressed how much Minneapolis has benefited from immigrant communities, and was clear that my main ask is that Operation Metro Surge needs to end. And he says the president agreed the situation cannot continue. And then he says some federal agents will begin leaving the area tomorrow, and he'll continue pushing for the rest involved in this operation to go. Minneapolis will continue to cooperate with state and local enforcement on real criminal investigations, but we will not participate in unconstitutional arrests of our neighbors, illegals, or enforce federal immigration law. Okay, well, no one asked you to. We just asked you to step aside. Violent criminals should be held accountable based on the crimes they commit, not based on where they are from. Well, if they're from somewhere else, they should definitely be deported, because that's worse. Like, it's two crimes at the same time, right? You stole something, but you were also in this country illegally. Okay, so let me continue this. So what's happening, in my opinion, is Tom Homan, President Trump, and these people they want to shift optics, right? Greg Bovino is way too cool and aggressive in terms of his demeanor. Like, he looks like the tough guy, because he is. He is a real man. And his persona is like the guy on the ground. Like, he's like a general, and he's amazing for morale. Like, I bet Border Patrol and ICE agents are happy as heck that the guy is around them, because he's on the ground. He's experiencing the same thing. He's getting in these tussles with protesters. And, so maybe he becomes a big villain. And so for optics, they take him out and bring Homan in. Homan is a lot more chilled and laid back. Although he has a different vision for deportations, like he wants the worst of the worst gone, as opposed to all the worst, which are all the illegals gone. Homan will come in and, steady the ship. Homan also worked under Obama, so perhaps that would be seen as a more reasonable option. Although Tom Homan is still great, but I guess it's like, hey, here's a new guy. He's better communicating or something. And then you tell Bovino to go somewhere else. Because Bovino wasn't always in Minneapolis. He's been all over the country. A few weeks ago, he was in New Orleans, getting in mayors' faces. Like, that's his whole thing. Like, being there, confronting the idiots on the ground, the buffoons on the ground. So I think what's happening now is it's just a shift of optics, and then for the Democrat mayors, they get to tell their base that some agents are leaving. And, that's intended to cool off temperatures, because everyone's tense right now. And if you can just bring down the temperature by a few degrees, no more Renee Goods and Alex Preddy's filling the media. And what's really interesting is the majority of the country, even now, support President Trump's deportations. And they want more, if anything. Every poll coming out that I've seen supports the deportations. And so it puts the Democrats in this terrible position where they're pushing the idea that ICE is deporting people, ICE is deporting people. But people like it. People are like, yes, awesome, right? because everyone knows that the border was open for 4 years. People still have trauma over that. People remember when buses from Texas were going all over the country to distribute illegals. Like Texas was literally like, it turned into an illegal alien distribution hub. A bus would go from Texas to Denver. It would go from Texas to Massachusetts, to New York, to Chicago. We remember that. People remember those things. And so Democrats are using the deportation optics to rejuvenate their base for the midterms. And that's dangerous for Republicans because some Republicans are complacent. They'll stay at home. They're happy to just relax. Trump's in office. Who cares? So I guess what the Trump administration's logic could be is, hey, look, deportations are a popular policy for the base. We can't stop that. But we also don't want the left too motivated to go vote. So let's, to work on something to slow down the pace, I suppose. So that's my take on what's going on. Could be completely wrong. It could just be that, I don't know, something else is happening. But, that's my take. That is my take. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, been live for 5 hours. They sold out. I hope that's not the case. I hope it is just an optics play. But look, it is the midterms, and I think I said this a few months ago. The calculus changes for every decision a president makes during the midterms, because everyone starts to think about how things look. So Trump wants a great economy. He doesn't want, kids and mothers getting arrested 2 weeks before the midterms. That would be a bad look. So I always expected deportations to decrease. But the problem is we haven't deported enough, so we can't waste any time. Truth be told, I think Trump needs to play this as safely as he can to get Republicans to win in 2028 and then have another 4 years of deportations at the highest level, right? Because everyone acts like Trump is the end-all be-all. Like, if he doesn't deport everybody, he failed. No, if he deports like 4 million people, that's great in 4 years. 1 million people a year, Also, I was really against paying people to self-deport, but now I'm fully for it. Because think about it. Each deportation, in terms of how much it cost for ICE and agents and, fuel and getting these people and then, detaining them and giving them a bed and running the facility, it costs like $17,000 to $20,000. I think that's the last number I read. Just give these people $10K with a nice free plane ticket on a commercial flight. The alternative is they get put in handcuffs and get nothing. A lot of them will take it, and that's what Kristi Noem has been pushing, and I think it's great. The criminals are probably the ones that, well, not probably, they're definitely the ones that would never take that because they're not law-abiding. They don't think logically. They think about crimes and things of that nature. So, you could still get the normie illegals out by paying them, instead of spending the money on the operation, risking the lives of federal law enforcement agents, have them focus on the criminals, and then just pay which is technically what they are doing. I guess I'm just suggesting a greater effort in that regard. I don't mind that Kristi Noem is spending tens of millions of dollars on advertising, telling people to self-deport. I think that's great because the self-deportation numbers, they look good. I don't know how verified they are, but they look good. When I say I don't know how verified they are, it's because it was done on some iffy survey about like how many people are in your household, and that survey determined that 1 point something million people had left. But it's like, okay, if there's federal pressure on illegal immigration. If you're an illegal immigrant, are you going to be like, yo, I'm illegal? No, you're going to be like, you're not going to even answer surveys. You're going to be on edge. So, maybe that
data was skewed by these different factors. But then again, it could be real that 1 point whatever million of self-deported, which would be great, which means more efforts need to be placed on paying people to leave. Tell them, hey, look, you can get an opportunity to come back legally. Just sell them hope, sell them dreams, and give them $5,000, $10,000. That's enough money to live anywhere in the world, apart from the first world nations. Yeah, you just have to be creative with solving certain problems, right? But anyways, Summer Dugan sent me $10. Thank you, Summer. All right, guys. We're gonna wrap it up. We've been streaming for 5 hours straight. I'm tired. Lord, I pray for ICE, Border Patrol agents. Give them courage. Keep them vigilant. And I pray you remove the scales from some of these people's eyes so they see the truth. In Jesus' name, amen. In 20 years, people are going to look back and go, man, those guys were heroes. They were getting, look, it wasn't pretty what happened to Alex Preddy, right? It wasn't pretty, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But the truth is, when you go interfere in a federal law enforcement operation and you're armed, there's always a chance. He should not have been there. He's a nurse. Okay, nurses are at hospitals treating Alzheimer's patients. What is he doing on a snowy day on the sidewalk, honking and screaming and recording federal law enforcement agents? Yeah, okay. He's just an innocent nurse. Okay, whatever. And I hope he believed in Jesus. Although, truthfully, I do doubt that. And look, I'm just saying. Thank you all very much for watching. God bless and goodbye.